wants her to follow. And that even though she knows her husband will not agree, she will go ahead and do it. And that therefore, if he still does not agree, she'll become even greater than she would have been. Okay? Bottom of 132 and top of 133. Weston keeps speaking with her, or the unman keeps speaking with her, and we're told at the very bottom of 132, the lady's response to the suggestion of becoming a risk bearer, a tragic pioneer, was still a response made chiefly out of her love for the king and for her unborn children, and even in a sense of Maladil himself. Now, what Lewis means by that is that she's contemplating doing what the unman was saying. But the motivation for her contemplating it is not out of a desire to be great herself. It's out of a desire to do something good for another. Thus, her motivation is not flawed. Her motivation is pure. It's the desire for good for another, the desire for the well-being for another. But, the narrator tells us, mixed with this response, from the moment when the unman began its tragic stories, there is the faintest touch of theatricality, the first hint of a self-admiring inclination to seize a grand role in the drama of the world. Although her motives are still pure, there's an aspect of her responses to the unman that are saying, that are demonstrating to Ransom that she is now starting to think she can become a great person. She can become in our language, kind of a drama queen. I mean, and a real queen, a Desdemona of sorts. Okay? And we're told this is the aspect of her character that the unman is trying to work on, that he's trying to build up and puff up. We're told, perhaps, while it remains so, that is, while it remains in her mind, though she doesn't act on it, she's protected from actual disobedience. Perhaps no rational creature, until such a motive became dominant, could really throw away happiness for anything quite so vague as the tempter's chatter about deeper life in the upward path. And then we're told what Ransom thinks about all this. What the unman said was very nearly true. We talked about this in class, that when he offers his temptations and when he uses logic, it's almost always true. He just slips in a little bit of falsehood, and that little bit of falsehood makes the whole thing false. Certainly it must be part of the divine plan that this happy creature, the Green Lady, should mature, should become more and more a creature of free choice, should become, in a sense, more distinct from God and from her husband in order thereby to be at one with him in a richer fashion. In other words, that's all true. But this present temptation, if conquered, would itself be the next and greatest step in the same direction. An obedience freer, more reasoned, more conscious than any she had known before was being put in her power. In other words, hold on one second. Ransom is coming to the conclusion that if she puts down, if she resists this temptation, then she will become more the woman that Maladil intends for her to be. And that in a sense, therefore, this temptation is good. But the flip side of that is, in undergoing the temptation, she is being moved along, maybe in a process that is occurring quicker than it originally would have. In other words, that Maladil did intend for her to become more and more distinct and separate from himself as the years go by. And what the temptation is doing is it is speeding up that process. In Orthodox theology, and I've mentioned several times, things about the Orthodox Church. In Orthodox theology, the fathers of the church understand the passage in Genesis that talks about humankind being made in the image and likeness of God. That image and likeness are two different things. Image is what Adam was created with at the beginning. Likeness was what Adam would grow into. That is, he had the image of God and he had the beginnings of the likeness of God. But if Adam had retained his prelapsarian perfection, he would have grown more and more and more and more and more and more and more like God as the years went by. Okay? The same fathers who argue that, partially argue that, also that on the basis of a New Testament text, where St. Paul or Peter, I can't remember which, talks about how we shall proceed from glory to glory. And Peter says in 1 Peter that, know ye not that ye are gods, and that ye shall be partakers of the divine nature. And that what that means is that through the process of what's called sanctification, we become more and more and more and more like God. Through adoption, not through our being or our essence. Okay? That's what kind of this means. In becoming more and more distinct, she is becoming more and more and more like God, who is the eternal I am. Okay? But there's something else also going on here, which is the nature of the temptation. Page 134 at the top. Ransom's thinking. She was still in her innocence. No evil intentions had been formed in her mind. But her will was, if her will, it's an important if, but if her will was uncorrupted, half her imagination was already filled with bright, poisonous shapes. Notice how corruption proceeds. It's beginning here in her imagination. She's having images in her mind of things that aren't. Okay? Remember that description of the imagination or of poetry and such as lies breathed through silver. She now has images in her mind of things that don't exist. And Lewis writes, her imagination is becoming poisoned. Just as Lewis's imagination, could be baptized by the works of George MacDonald. The Green Lady's imagination is becoming poisoned by the works of the Unman. Something's got to stop. Okay? They keep talking. And Ransom thinks, oh, well, this is good. Page 135. She's only learning vanity. But he doesn't immediately realize how important that is. And then the Unman shows her, on page 136, an image of herself in a mirror. And it startles her. And she says on page 137, things being two when they are one. Talking about herself and then the image of herself that she sees in the mirror. That thing, she points at the mirror, is me and not me. And I notice that. It is me and it is not me. Now if you remember something we talked about in class the other day, talked about classical logic, how it's founded upon the basic equation. A is not non-A. What has she just said? She says, that thing is me and not me. How can it be both me and not me, logically? Weston, but if you do not look, you will never know how beautiful you are. It comes into my mind, stranger, she answered, that a fruit does not eat itself, and a man cannot be together with himself. In other words, what the unman has done by showing her an image of herself is he's split her down the middle, as it were, and said, this is you, or excuse me, this is you, and this thing over here is also you. Yet this thing over here is not her, right? It's completely separate from her. And she says, the fruit cannot eat itself. What does that mean? The fruit exists for something else. And a man cannot be together with himself. That is, a man cannot be together with himself means he cannot be divided and then become whole. A fruit cannot do that because it is only a fruit, says the unman. But we can do it. We call this thing a mirror. A man can love himself and be together with himself. That is what it means to be a man or a woman. To walk alongside oneself as if one were a second person and to delight in one's own beauty. A man can love himself and be together with himself. Is he only teaching her vanity? No. Is he teaching her pride? To some extent, yes. What's he really teaching her? Narcissism. To love the self more than anything else. She asks, is it a good? Ransom, no. The unman, how can you find out without trying? Okay? This is the notion that William Blake was getting at in his poems that we've talked about. The songs of innocence and experience. How can you know what is good without experiencing what is evil? Notice the tree that Adam ate of. The knowledge of good and evil. Prior to that, prior to tasting that fruit, what did Adam think? What does God say after each day of creation? It is good, 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 it is good. Adam thought all was good. Why? All was good. Ransom, if you try it and it is not good, how do you know whether you will be able to stop doing it? If you try the stepping alongside and looking at yourself and the experience is not good, how do you know you'll be able to stop? How do you know you'll be able to stop eating that tree or that fruit when it's not good? It's like the old, what potato chip commercial was it? You can never eat only one Lay's. Okay? I mean, that's the essence of temptation right there. They keep talking. I've got to move on a little bit more quickly. Weston, or the unman, gives her the mirror. And she looks at it and such. And at the bottom of 138, we're told, the expression of her face was noble. It was a great deal too noble. That is, what Ransom is seeing is that she now has an idea of nobility about herself. Greatness, tragedy, high sentiment. These were obviously what occupied her thoughts. The image of her beautiful body had been offered to her only as a means to awake the far more perilous image of her great soul. Why? She can't see her soul. It's like Lewis talks about in the essay I've mentioned several times before, transposition. We argue the higher things by reason of using images of lower things. Okay? We have images of fathers all throughout our lives. And so we understand God as Father because of that kind of language. The external and, as it were, dramatic conception of the self was the enemy's true aim. The dramatic conception of the self. He was making her mind a theater in which that phantom self should hold the stage.